It's become too familiar for our friends and loved ones in Israel. Today, a drone attack. Yesterday, hundreds of rockets from Hezbollah. 2 days ago, the largest ballistic missile attack in history launched by Iran against our people. But what happened on that dreadful October day was far from familiar. At 6:29 a.m., the sirens sounded, Tseva Adom, Tseva Adom, red alert, red alert. Thousands of rockets coming from Gaza. At the Nova Music Festival, less than 3 miles from the Gaza border, dancers and revelers had been up all night listening, enjoying trance music together. They were watching as the sun rised that morning, praying for peace with dreams of a new day. They cut the music. The DJs yelled, Tseva Adom, Tseva Adom. The revelers fled to their cars, to shelters. At that time, explosives and bulldozers breached the fence between Gaza and Israel, and terrorists flowed in on motorbikes and pickup trucks and motorized air gliders. They had maps of the IDF bases, the military institutions, the farming communities, the kibbutzim and the moshavim, some of whom had Gazan civilian employees that worked there who Hamas clearly extracted intelligence from. They came armed with their Kalashnikovs and their grenade launchers, with their sniper rifles, with their machine guns. They came in the kibbutzim after they took control of them. They went door to door, burning down homes to get families to flee from their safe rooms, to capture them. Bullets took 6 military bases near the Gaza border that day. The terrorists, they degraded the bodies of corpses. They raped indiscriminately people of all genders and ages. They mutilated genitalia. They burned people alive. They beheaded babies. That day, they recorded it all on their GoPro cameras. They called their parents to Kvel to brag about it. God is great, they said with sadistic glee. 1,205 innocents were murdered and worse that day. Another 251 were taken as hostages, stolen to Gaza, of which 101 still remain. Like Moses we call, Shlach et ami, let my people go. Hirsch Goldberg Poland and Aner Shapira were among the revelers at the Nova Festival. As they fled, they found their way to a shelter alongside Route 232, the main road along the Gaza border. It was already filled with people inside seeking shelter. When the terrorists came, they threw grenades into the shelter. Aner, towards the front, took the live grenades and threw them back out It was the 8th grenade that took his life and Hirsch's hand. Then the terrorists loaded up Hirsch and others towards the front of the shelter onto their pickup trucks, taking them hostage until they had enough, and then they turned their weapons on those that remained. We all cry. Hours later, 7 souls were recovered living from that shelter, drenched in the blood of their partners and friends. Traumatized, they credit Aner's bravery and heroism for saving their lives. We've come to know Hirsch and his family in part because of the bravery, courage, and leadership of his parents, Rachel and John, who have spoken out for the hostages again and again. Of course, Hirsch survived for 11 months in those terror tunnels under Gaza before, as rescuers approached, his Hamas captors murdered him and the other hostages with him. Tomorrow we'll read in our Haftarah, Rachel machbeh al baneha, Rachel weeps for her children. We all weep with her. Omer Neutra was taken hostage. He was a tank commander. He grew up in a conservative synagogue just like ours, went to Camp Ramah, USY on wheels. My friend Rabbi Joel Levinson officiated his bar mitzvah. In fact, Omer's prom date, Shana, is a student at ASU and is with us today. We've had this chair for Omer on our bima for nearly a year now. We pray that very soon he and all the hostages, we can welcome them home. Eden Ben Ruby, Rob mentioned. Eden Ben Ruby was 23 years old when her life was snuffed out by Hamas. She was the life of the party. She was at the rave. She was an artist who loved sunsets and painting and the sea. A beautiful soul. I remember the first time I saw Eden's face. It was in February when I was in Israel and I was at the Nova Festival site in Re'im. And the main memorial that's there is these pillars. And on the top of each pillar is a photo of a person who was abducted or murdered from the festival. Beautiful photos, smiling photos of young, loving, joyful people. And you walk through and it's overwhelming. You walk through and you're there, and oftentimes there's a person standing who will tell you a story about the person that they're grieving, that they're standing by. People have left notes and other memorabilia that give you a glimpse into who this person was, into their souls. It happened that as I was wandering through this maze of beautiful, tragic faces, my son here FaceTimed me. And not wanting to alarm my 8-year-old or explain where I was, I stepped back a little bit so that all he would see is my face and the trees of the forest nearby behind me. And I opened the FaceTime and held up my phone. And I greeted him. And as I looked at my smiling, joyful 8-year-old, my phone, it was right there in line with all those other faces. Yeah, it's worth crying about. And I realized they're all our children. They're all our children. My son was there with them in that moment, among the memorial. You know, when Hamas attacked on October 7th, when Hezbollah attacked on October 8th, when Iran and the Houthis send missiles, they're not just attacking a country. They are attacking the entire Jewish people. Later today, we'll offer the Unatan Tokef prayer, where we liken ourselves to sheep, passive and subdued, powerless. Sheep being counted and assessed and judged and sentenced by our shepherd above. But you know, the sages in the Talmud, they actually debate what the words in the Unatan Tokef mean there, where it says B'nai Maron. And though some rabbis in the Talmud say, yes, it means like sheep, there are others who say, no, it means like soldiers of King David. What we are judged on in this moment, at this time, is whether we are passive like sheep, failing to respond to the slanders and circumstances that plague us, or whether we stand up courageously, fighting back against those who are our enemies, like soldiers united under the banner of David. I want to share with all of you how deeply proud I am to be your rabbi, and especially how proud I am to be your rabbi this year. This year, you have doubled down on your Zionism. We are Congregation Or Tzion. We are literally the community that spreads the light of Zion. And that is who you are. You have stood up for the hostages. You have shared about the goodness of Israel. You have supported our students on a hostile campus. You have created and posted and shared. You have texted and called and WhatsApped. You have. You've flown across the world into a war zone to support our soldiers on the front lines. You volunteered at army bases, sorting whatever needs to be sorted, cooking whatever needs to be cooked, doing whatever you can to be part of this effort. You have picked produce when farm workers have abandoned the region of fear. You have let our brothers and sisters in Israel know how loved they are. You have bared witness. You have represented us all. You've rallied at venues big and small, from the street corner to the Capitol to the principal's office. You have. You've even read those articles I linked to in my weekly emails. You have. You've lobbied your elected officials to let them know where we stand. You have. You've leaned in when it would be so much easier to step back. You care. You have given of your time and of your treasure to our synagogue, to the Center for Jewish Philanthropy, to the Jewish National Fund, to AIPAC, to FIDF, to American Friends of Magen David Adom, to Hillel, and to so many others doing righteous, needed work this year. You have. And also, you have doubled down on your Judaism. There are more people in this room than there were last year. You've attended another service. You have committed yourself more deeply to your Judaism. You joined our live stream. Shout out to all of you online. You have. You've decided to make Shabbat dinner a part of your family's weekly life. You bought a talit for the first time. You committed to wearing tefillin every day. You did. You looked inside our tradition and realized that there is so much more there than you had realized before. It makes me so proud. For some of you, you had an awkward conversation with an employer or a boss in order to be able to take off and be here today. Because being here, being part and present with your Jewish family, with your congregation, matters to you. You faced your fear. You stepped up when your colleague, your boss, your roommate, your crazy uncle, your parent, your sibling, your child, repeated something that they heard somewhere else, something ignorant, something hurtful, something wrong. But you didn't let it slide. I have to tell you, back in November, there was a death threat against me. But standing up to someone you love, just as scary, if not more so. I'm so proud of you. You know, what is morally indefensible has become socially acceptable. What should be easy and obvious to say now takes moral courage. I am so proud of your courage, of the way that each of you share our story. Our story. We were slaves in the land of Egypt, and Adonai, our God, took us out of there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. And he brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey, a land intended for us, a promised land, the land of Israel. Our ancestors thrived there for hundreds of years before we were exiled from our land and endured thousands of years of oppression. But we never forgot where we came from. We turned towards Jerusalem in prayer. We prayed every day for the redemption of Zion. We never gave up or lost hope, and eventually we came home. We saw a neglected land and made it flow with milk and honey once again. We drained the swamps. We planted forests. We made the desert bloom. We created a renewal of Judaism, revived our ancient language, ingathered our exiles. Gathered our exiles and reunited our holy city. We created a nation state, declared our independence, founded the only democracy in the Middle East, developed revolutionary, world-changing technologies, and out of necessity, we fortified a military to enable us to protect ourselves. Seeking peace, but prepared to respond to those uninterested in that pursuit. It's an incredible story, and one we should all celebrate and be deeply proud of. There is, however, another story about Israel that is told in our discourse today. One that is shared by and pushed by Iran, pushed by some TikTok influencers, pushed by some compromised professors. It originates from Soviet propagandists. In this story, Israel occupies historic Palestine, even though, of course, it was after Israel's independence, long after, in the 1960s and 70s, that Arabs in the region first appropriated the British Roman name Palestine for the region as a way of declaring and claiming their own indigeneity, to cast doubt and to question the previously unquestioned, unbroken bond between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, historically, culturally, and religiously. In this alternative story, Israeli Jews are cast as foreign interlopers, as white Europeans, even though Jews come in every color of the rainbow, even though no white supremacist would ever consider any of us white, and even though most Israeli Jews have no European ancestry. In this story that is told, they call Israel a colonization project, when in fact, Israel is the greatest example of decolonization that the world has ever seen. The state of Israel brought back indigenous people and repatriated them to their historic homeland in record numbers, throwing out the colonial rulers, the British, the Ottomans before them, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Muslim Arabs too. And in this story, in this telling, Israel is equated with the greatest evils of our discourse in our world today. Genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing. All things, by the way, that Jews historically have been victims of. All things, by the way, that Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran have declared their desire to do to the Jewish people. But all you have to do is notice that 20% of the Israeli populace are Arabs with full citizenship, equal rights, votes. That's the opposite of ethnic cleansing. It's the opposite of apartheid. And regarding the genocide libel, just notice that over the last 60 years, the Palestinian population of Gaza has increased tenfold, the opposite of what you would expect, of what would happen if there was actually a genocide. And regarding this righteous war of self-defense, know that October 7th was not a response to Israeli occupation. It was not a resistance. The occupation of Gaza ended with the disengagement in 2005, nearly 20 years ago. And Israel does not target civilians, nor does it bomb indiscriminately, as its detractors too often claim. It is the terrorists, in fact, that use civilians as human shields and put them in harm's way. And just look at the extraordinary effort that Israel has gone to target terrorists without harming civilians in their midst. Just 2 weeks ago, we saw the remarkable pager and walkie-talkie attack on Hezbollah terrorists. And similarly, the investment that Israel has made to drop leaflets, to send text messages, to make phone calls, to move people out of harm's way. It's genuinely extraordinary. In fact, Israel's operations in Gaza this year have the lowest civilian fatality rate in the history of contemporary urban warfare. It's incredible. In 1892, cultural Zionist icon, poet, and author Ahad Ha'am wrote that the blood libel, the original blood libel, gave him a chetzi nechama, a half comfort. For those unfamiliar, the blood libel was a claim that was used to promote anti-Semitism and violence against Jews throughout the Middle Ages and was very popular, that said that Jews murdered Gentiles to use their blood for the baking of our Passover matzah. Now, many of us are aware that if you have any ingredient in Passover matzah that's not water or flour, it's not kosher or Passover. Some of you are aware that the Torah explicitly prohibits us from consuming blood of any kind. That's why we have kosher salt to drain out the blood. Some of you know that even if we could consume blood, we couldn't consume of non-kosher animals, which include humans. We're not kosher to eat. And certainly, Chad Ha'am understood that in a time historically where most Jews actually made their own matzahs and weren't able to buy them from a box in the store, that even Jews who were not particularly knowledgeable would know this. And it would be plainly obvious and absurd to any person with any knowledge of Judaism that the blood libel was false and a lie, never happened. And Chad Ha'am was comforted by this. And the reason was because he said it proves by example that it is indeed possible for the whole world to seemingly believe something that is so obviously wrong, and for the Jewish community to know what is right and true. Sometimes we need that reminder that the whole world can be wrong and that we can be right. That reminder that we are part of a strong, proud, and enduring people that lives. That reminder of Am Yisrael Chai, the people Israel lives. Rabbi Kaplan of blessed memory established the practice of sending you home on the first day of Rosh Hashanah with something to remind you, to reinforce the message of his sermons, and I honor him by continuing that practice. So as you leave our sanctuary today, be sure to take one of these Am Yisrael Chai Congregation Or Tzion magnets with you. Please put it somewhere that you will see and be reminded that the nation of Israel lives, that you are part of a congregation, a community, a family, a people that is strong and thriving, that despite our scars, that despite the venom of our enemies, that we continue to endure, that we thrive, that we are proud and alive. Am Yisrael Chai. In 1945, April, 5 days after the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, a group of survivors was caught on camera by a BBC radio reporter singing Hatikva. Now, the state of Israel hadn't been established. It wasn't yet the anthem of the Jewish state, but it was a song familiar to many European Zionists, and these survivors knew this song. They cried at their liberation. They cried at the losses that they had endured. They knew that they were being filmed. They were weak, but they wanted the world to hear their voices. They sang Hatikva with all their hearts. Our hope is not lost, they sang. And then the rabbi leading this Friday evening service, Rabbi Leslie Hardman, a Welsh army chaplain who had spent the past week saying Kaddish over open graves with tangled corpses and limbs. He called out, Am Yisrael Chai, the people Israel still liveth. You can watch it, it's on YouTube. 2 decades later, the student struggle for Soviet Jewry connected with rabbi songwriter Shlomo Karlebach to create an anthem for their movement. He put these words, Am Yisrael Chai, Od Avinu Chai, to music. The people Israel lives. Our Father still lives. 10 years ago, during Operation Protective Edge in Gaza, Rabbi Micah of blessed memory led our congregation in this very song, asserting the endurance, the goodness, and the life of the Jewish nation. At our Raz Gadel religious school here, We've sung it every Sunday this year. Part of that is because since October, Am Yisrael Chai has become our anthem once again. Hamas tried to obliterate us. Hezbollah and Iran have similar intentions. Anti-Semitism seems to be at heights unimaginable just a year ago. And we're still here. We're still alive. We're still proud. Am Yisrael Chai, the people Israel still liveth. In our Passover Seder we say, V'hi sha'amda. It is not only one who rose up to destroy us, but in every generation they rise up to destroy us. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis. V'hakadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu mi'adam. But the Holy One, blessed be God, redeems us from their hand. Our shofar is sometimes likened to an alarm. But unlike the alarm that calls out Tseva Adom, that calls for us to flee, to hide, our shofar calls out for us to stand proud, to tell our story, to show courage. Our shofar calls out to us, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai. The people Israel still liveth. Shana Tova.